Here's something the rich rapper narrative never really gets into. Some of the wealthiest artists in the entire genre are also some of the most financially disciplined human beings alive. We're talking men worth tens and even hundreds of millions of dollars who still ride the subway, drive cars older than their careers, and do their own laundry at public laundromats by choice. So what do they actually know that the flashy spending culture doesn't want you to think about? Let's find out as we look at 8 of these most fascinating cases of rich rappers living a poor life. And trust me, number 1 will genuinely make you rethink everything about hip-hop and money. Number 8. Big Sean. $30 million and still afraid to spend it. Big Sean is worth $30 million, has multiple platinum albums, and got his first major break signing with Kanye West's GOOD music label. By every conventional measure, he made it. And yet, for years after that signing, he was still living in his mother's basement in Detroit. Not as a publicity angle, not as a brand moment, but out of genuine, bone-deep fear. His mom was a school teacher. Growing up, he watched her get buried under unpaid bills, and that image never really left him. When the money finally showed up, his instinct wasn't to splurge. It was to guard it like something fragile, because he'd seen firsthand how fast things could fall apart. He's spoken openly in interviews about developing what he calls a kind of financial paranoia, this underlying anxiety that the whole thing could unravel if he relaxed for even a second. But here's what makes his story genuinely interesting. He didn't just sit on the money and breathe a sigh of relief. He took that fear and turned it into fuel for his hometown. His Sean Anderson Foundation runs a program called Mogul Prep, where he teaches high school students the behind-the-scenes jobs in the music industry: sound engineering, lighting, tour management, specifically because those careers have 30 to 50-year lifespans, which he'll point out is dramatically longer than most artists' time in the spotlight. He's donated fully equipped recording studios to his old high school, Cass Technical, and to the Boys and Girls Club. He put $25,000 directly toward housing insecure students at Wayne State University. He raised $100,000 for kids affected by the Flint water crisis. The man took childhood financial trauma and quietly built a whole infrastructure around making sure the next generation doesn't go through the same thing. Now, if Big Sean's story is about turning fear into something constructive, our next entry is a guy who took a completely different approach. Colder, more calculated, and honestly kind of hilarious. Number 7. Akon. Fake Dior, sold the jet, and building a city in Africa. Akon once bought a private jet. He used it for 6 months, sat down with the actual numbers, upward of $2 to $3 million a year in fuel, storage, and maintenance before you even factor in the flights themselves, and sold it without much sentimentality. He now charters when he needs to, or flies commercial, and has said he only entertains private aviation at all when it can function as a negotiation tool in a business context. The jet wasn't a status symbol to him, it was a liability dressed up as one, and he treated it accordingly. The fashion thing is even more telling. Akon has publicly admitted to wearing knockoff designer clothes. He specifically mentioned a Dior shirt as a substitute for Dior. And his reasoning wasn't that he couldn't afford the real thing. It was that he views European luxury branding as a form of economic extraction, and he'd rather put that same money into supporting African vendors producing similar goods at a fraction of the margin. That's not frugality for its own sake. That's a philosophical stance with a pretty coherent logic behind it. And when you trace where those savings actually go, the picture gets genuinely staggering. Akon Lighting Africa has delivered solar energy to over 14 countries on the continent, bringing electricity to communities that had never had consistent access to it. He's developing Akon City, a proposed $6 billion smart city in Senegal, designed around technology, healthcare, and economic infrastructure. He owns diamond mines in South Africa. The man has essentially restructured his entire financial life around the idea that every dollar not spent performing wealth for an audience is a dollar building something that will outlast him by generations. Whether Akon City ever fully materializes or not, the scale of what he's attempting is almost impossible to square with the guy who's out here in a knockoff Dior shirt. Akon is playing a continental game, but our next entry is playing a much quieter one, walking 5 miles to the pier every morning, sketching on the beach, and doing his laundry at a public laundromat because, apparently, he finds it peaceful. Number 6. Andre 3000, Venice Beach, 40 flutes, and the art of opting out. If you had told someone in 2003 that one half of Outkast, the most critically celebrated rap duo of that entire era, would spend his days walking alone to the Santa Monica Pier and doing his own laundry at a public laundromat, they would have assumed you were describing a collapse of some kind. It's actually the opposite. Andre 3000 is worth somewhere between $35 and $45 million. And by most accounts, the life he's built in Venice Beach looks a lot more like contentment than anything you'd find on a celebrity house tour. He rises before the sun for a 5-mile walk to the pier and back. No security detail, no entourage, just him moving through the neighborhood like a regular person. He's described the laundromat as genuinely zen, a place to slow down, sit under fluorescent lights, and exist in the same unremarkable space as everyone else. He's been spotted sketching on the beach, playing the flute for strangers, and generally living in a way that makes you wonder if he ever really wanted the celebrity part at all or just tolerated it as the cost of making the music. His spending reflects this almost completely. He's built an archive of roughly 40 flutes sourced from different countries, each in a different key, each carrying a different history, including a cherry red Chinese flute and a Mayan death whistle, which is exactly as intense as it sounds. He credits an ayahuasca experience in Hawaii with clearing the creative block and social anxiety that had kept him largely silent for years, and that eventually fed into his instrumental album New Blue Sun. For someone who could be spending his money on almost anything, the investments are almost exclusively inward. Art, experience, tools for making sound. Which honestly, at $40 million with no debt and no drama, might be the quietest flex on this entire list. Andre 3000 chose simplicity after achieving everything. The next guy made it his entire brand from day one and built a genuine career out of it, right down to the car he still refuses to replace. Number 5. D1. The student loan payoff that went viral. Most artists, when they land their first major record deal advance, immediately go looking for a house, a car, something tangible to show for it. D1 got his advance and used every dollar of it to pay off his student loans. Not a portion of it, all of it. Then he wrote a song about the moment called Sally Mae Back. It went viral, and that specific act of fiscal discipline became the foundation of a national platform he's been building on ever since. He still drives a 1998 Honda Accord with over 300,000 miles on it, and he's been pretty explicit about the fact that keeping the car is a deliberate choice rather than a financial necessity. His argument, and it's one he's made consistently across interviews and speaking engagements, is that the pressure within Black communities specifically to look like money is one of the primary engines of generational financial struggle, and that driving an old car while being a millionaire is his way of publicly refusing to participate in that pressure. It's a teachable moment on 4 wheels. What makes D1 genuinely distinct in this list is that he's taken the personal philosophy and institutionalized it. He runs financial literacy programs built around 4 principles he teaches to young adults: maintaining an emergency fund, borrowing smart, saving for retirement, and learning to make more out of less. He speaks at schools and events. His independent label, The Mission, is structured to stay lean enough that his career remains viable regardless of whatever the industry decides to do next. His net worth sits around $1 to $2 million, which is modest by the standards of this list. But the man has 0 debt, a fully owned business, and a message with an audience. The math is actually pretty clean. Next up is a rapper who is somehow even more committed to a car story, and this guy is worth up to $80 million. Number 4. Ludacris. The 1993 Acura with 255,000 miles. Ludacris is worth somewhere between $25 and $80 million, depending on how you value his various holdings. He has a major stake in one of the most commercially successful film franchises in history. He owns airport restaurants. He produces television and film content. He holds real estate across Atlanta, Houston, and Miami. And his most prized possession is a 1993 Acura Legend he bought in 1999 when he was still a pre-famed DJ in Atlanta, and which now has over 255,000 miles on the odometer. When the car sustained damage in 2015, the obvious move would have been to just let it go and upgrade. Instead, he commissioned a full restoration from Acura's own design studio. New leather, updated audio systems, but kept the original 1993 body entirely intact. That's not nostalgia in the sentimental, passive sense. That's a conscious decision to preserve something specific, and what it represents is pretty clear. The version of himself that existed before the money, before the franchise, before all the external validation. He's talked about the legend as a grounding mechanism, a physical thread back to a life that was real before everything got complicated. There's actually a compelling psychological case that wealthy people who maintain these kinds of touchstones, artifacts from before, tend to handle money more sustainably over time, because it keeps the pre-fame version of yourself present and legible rather than something you're always running from. Whether or not that's what Ludacris has consciously thought through, the financial outcomes back it up. He owns an airport restaurant, which means he's earning passive income from a captive audience of people who are stuck, hungry, and have no other options. That alone is a level of business thinking that most people in entertainment never get to. Ludacris uses a 30-year-old car as an anchor to who he was. Our next entry made a very public break from his past spending mid-career, and has been remarkably transparent about exactly what that pivot cost him, and what it built. Number 3. 21 Savage abandoned jewelry and taught kids about credit scores. In 2018, 21 Savage announced publicly that he was done spending money on jewelry. For someone who had previously dropped 6 figures on diamond chains and built a significant part of his early image around that kind of display, it was a real cultural moment. And he's been unusually open about the direct financial result. Since he stopped, his net worth has grown at a noticeably faster rate, because capital that used to leave his account in the form of depreciating luxury goods is now staying in the account and working for him instead. What replaced the jewelry spending is a pretty interesting window into how his thinking shifted. He spent $100,000 on a specialized gaming bed, a custom sleep system designed for people who spend extended hours in front of screens, built around spinal support and long-term physical health. On paper, that sounds extravagant, but the distinction he draws is between invisible luxury and visible status. And the bed is a pure example of the former. Expensive, functional, entirely private. Nobody sees it. It improves his quality of life. That's the logic. He also owns his master recordings, which is still genuinely uncommon enough in this industry to be worth flagging. Owning your masters means you collect substantially higher royalties every time your music is streamed, licensed, or used commercially. The gap between a standard label deal and master ownership can, over the course of a career, be the difference between comfortable wealth and generational wealth. And then there's the 21 Savage bank account campaign, a partnership with the nonprofit Get Schooled, where he's personally gone into schools and taught students the basics of banking, credit scores, and taxes, financial literacy tools he's admitted he didn't have access to when he came up. For someone whose public persona is built on being deliberately hard to read, the financial literacy work is a genuine and pretty remarkable contradiction. It also happens to be, arguably, the most durable thing he'll leave behind. 21 Savage evolved publicly and let the compound interest do the talking. But the top 2 on this list were playing a different game entirely from the very beginning, before anyone was watching closely enough to notice. Starting with a man worth $200 million who, at the height of his commercial breakthrough, deliberately bought the least impressive house he could justify. Number 2. Kendrick Lamar. The $523,000 house that made a $200 million empire possible. In 2013, the year after Good Kid, Mad City turned Kendrick Lamar into one of the most discussed artists on the planet, he bought a house. A 3,500 square foot home in Eastvale, California, purchased for $523,400. He had earned approximately $9 million that year. Sit with that ratio for a moment, because that gap between what he earned and what he chose to spend on his own home is basically the entire story. Eastvale is not a celebrity neighborhood. It's a quiet, unremarkable suburb about an hour outside of Los Angeles. Nobody goes looking for famous people there. And that was almost certainly the point. By choosing a $500,000 home over a $10 million Calabasas estate during the most volatile, unpredictable years of his early career, Lamar kept his burn rate so low that the money he was making had nowhere to go except into a growing reserve. He was building what you'd have to call a war chest, even if he wasn't using that language. That reserve eventually deployed with surgical precision. By 2024, his real estate portfolio included a $42 million compound in Brentwood and an $8.6 million penthouse in Brooklyn, assets he could purchase outright and sustainably, rather than stretching into during a hot streak and then quietly offloading when the income got less predictable. His company pgLang functions essentially as a personal venture capital operation, funding his own videos, tours, and creative collaborations without ceding control to a label or a studio. That level of creative and financial independence is only structurally possible because he didn't burn through the early years maintaining an image that wasn't yet paid for. His personal life has remained almost stubbornly private throughout all of it. No social media flexing, rarely photographed outside of professional contexts, no visible performance of wealth in any form. He looks by every external measure like a thoughtful and comfortable person of moderate means, which at $200 million net worth is either the most impressive discipline on this list or the clearest proof that how much you actually need external validation is, in the end, a choice. Kendrick played the long game with almost no visible tells. But our number one, who's a magna cum laude business graduate who was still riding the subway while platinum albums were charting, might be the most deliberately constructed financial story in the entire genre. Number 1. J. Cole. Bicycles, hoodies, and a stake in the Charlotte Hornets. The thing about J. Cole that tends to get lost in the broader conversation about his music is this. Before he was a rapper, he was a business administration student who graduated magna cum laude from St. John's University. While he was hustling to get his foot in the door in New York, he was also working in telecollections and advertising sales, grinding through regular jobs that gave him a granular, practical understanding of how money actually moves through systems, how debt works, and why so many people end up on the wrong side of it. That foundation never really left him. It shows up in nearly every financial decision he's made since the money arrived. His lifestyle, even at his commercial peak, has remained almost deliberately inconspicuous. Plain hoodies, no visible jewelry, and a consistent lack of interest in the performance of wealth that defines so much of his industry. Fans have caught him on bicycles and on the subway in New York, not as a PR stunt, but because that's genuinely how he moves through the world. His "love yours" philosophy, the idea that chasing external markers of status is ultimately a distraction from anything that actually matters, isn't just a recurring lyrical theme. It's demonstrably how he lives. And what that philosophy has enabled, financially, is extraordinary. By maintaining an almost laughably low personal overhead for over a decade, no fleet of supercars, no rotating jewelry collection, no sprawling entourage budget, Cole has been able to mobilize his capital into positions that most artists never reach. In June 2023, he joined an ownership group to purchase the Charlotte Hornets from Michael Jordan and became a minority owner of an NBA franchise. That's not a flex you post on Instagram. That's a 15-year financial strategy arriving at its destination, quietly, while everyone else was still arguing about who had the better chain. But honestly, the detail that stays with me most about J. Cole isn't the Hornets. In 2014, he purchased his childhood home in Fayetteville, North Carolina. The house that had been repossessed from his mother when he was young, the specific absence that shaped a significant part of who he became. He didn't keep it as a personal landmark or a symbol of how far he'd come. He converted it into the Dreamville house, a rent-free residence for single mothers and their children, giving them the kind of stable, secure housing that he and his mother didn't have access to during the years that mattered most. The thing that was taken from him became a resource for families in exactly the same position he once was in. That's not a wealth management strategy. That's a worldview that happens to have a very well-funded balance sheet behind it. And at $60 to $65 million, with an NBA ownership stake, a community real estate portfolio, a career built entirely on his own terms, and a childhood home that now houses single mothers rent-free. It's genuinely hard to argue that anyone on this list has put their money to more intentional use. And with that note, we conclude our journey through the richest black rappers who live like they're poor. Which of these names surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments, And for more interesting peeks into how Black wealth is regulating across the globe, take a look. Black status.